In the shadow of towering pyramids and under the watchful eyes of gods carved in stone, a ritual unfolded that would shock the world. The Aztec Empire, a civilization of dazzling art, complex calendars, and powerful warriors, practiced something that still stirs controversy today: human sacrifice. To modernize, the idea seems barbaric, even unthinkable. Yet for the Aztecs, it was not just a religious act, it was a necessity, a sacred duty to keep the universe alive. The scene was chilling. A chosen victim, often a captured warrior or a slave, stood atop the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan. Priests, their hands stained with blood, raised obsidian blades to the sky. The crowd below fell silent. Then, in a single swift motion, the priest cut into the chest of the victim, tore out the still-beating heart, and held it aloft to the sun. This was no random act of violence. It was a ritual meant to nourish the gods and ensure the survival of the world. But why did the Aztecs do it? Why did they believe that blood and death were the price of cosmic balance? And how did this practice shape their empire? To understand the Aztec Empire is to understand human sacrifice. It was not a side note in their history. It was central to their identity, their politics, and their survival. This is the story of a civilization that saw death not as an end, but as a gift to the gods. And it is a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient history. The Aztec Empire rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful civilizations in Mesoamerica. At its peak in the 15th and early 16th centuries, it stretched across much of modern-day Mexico. Its capital, Tenochtitlan, was a marvel of engineering built on an island in Lake Texcoco. The city was crisscrossed with canals, bustling markets, and towering temples. It was a center for culture, trade, and military might. Yet beneath its grandeur lay a belief system that demanded blood. The Aztecs did not invent human sacrifice. They inherited the practice from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, such as the Maya and the Toltecs. But they refined it, expanded it, and made it a cornerstone of their empire. For the Aztecs, the world was a delicate balance of forces. They believed that the gods had created the world through sacrifice. In return, humans had to offer blood to keep the cosmos in motion. Without these offerings, the sun might stop rising, the rains might fail, and chaos would consume the world. This belief shaped every aspect of Aztec life. Rulers were not just political leaders, they were intermediaries between the people and the gods. The priests who performed the sacrifices were seen as protectors of the universe. Even common citizens played a role by attending rituals and offering smaller sacrifices, such as cutting their own skin to let blood drip onto sacred stones. In the Aztec world, death was not the end, it was a transformation, a way to return life to the divine forces that had given it. To understand why the Aztecs practiced human sacrifice, one must first understand their worldview. They did not see death as cruel or senseless. They saw it as necessary. Their empire was built on the idea that survival depended on pleasing the gods. And so they gave the gods what they demanded: blood, hearts, and lives. The Aztec gods were not gentle deities of peace and mercy. They were powerful, demanding, and deeply tied to the forces of nature. Among them, none was more feared and revered than Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. According to Aztec mythology, Huitzilopochtli was born fully armed, slaying his siblings in a violent battle to protect his mother, the earth goddess Coatlicue. He became the patron of the Aztec people, guiding them to build their empire and demanding constant offerings to keep the sun strong. Without human blood, the Aztecs believed Huitzilopochtli would weaken, and the world would fall into darkness. Another key figure in the Aztec pantheon was Tlaloc, the god of rain and storms. He was both a giver and a taker of life. The Aztecs believed that Tlaloc needed the tears of children to bring rain, which is why many child sacrifices were made in his honor. These offerings took place on mountaintops where priests would leave the bodies of sacrificed children as gifts to the sky. The cries of the young were thought to call down the rain, ensuring the fertility of the land. The goddess Coatlicue, mother of Huitzilopochtli, was another central deity. She was a symbol of life and death, fertility and destruction. Her image was terrifying, adorned with a skirt of snakes and hands made of claws. She represented the cycle of life, and her worship was tied to the idea that death was necessary for rebirth. These gods and many others shaped the Aztec understanding of sacrifice. They were not abstract figures, but living forces that needed to be fed. The Aztecs believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and in return, humans had to give back. This was not a cruel act. It was a sacred duty, a way to keep the universe in balance. At the heart of the Aztec Empire stood its rulers, men who wielded both political power and divine authority. The most influential among them was Moctezuma II, whose reign from 1502 to 1520 marked a time of both grandeur and growing unease. As the supreme leader, Moctezuma was not only the head of the empire, but also the chief intermediary between the people and the gods. He presided over the most elaborate rituals, ensuring that the demands of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc were met. Under his rule, human sacrifice reached its peak in scale and frequency, with thousands of victims offered in massive ceremonies.
Moctezuma's devotion to the gods was absolute. He expanded the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan, dedicating it to both Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, reinforcing the idea that the empire's survival depended on their favor. He also oversaw the construction of new temples and the organization of grand festivals, where captives were sacrificed in elaborate public displays. These events were not merely religious acts, they were political tools. By demonstrating the gods' power through sacrifice, Moctezuma reinforced his own divine right to rule. Yet Moctezuma was not the only leader who shaped the sacrificial system. His predecessors, such as Ahuitzotl, had expanded the empire through conquest, providing a steady supply of captives for ritual slaughter. Ahuitzotl's military campaigns brought thousands of prisoners to Tenochtitlan, ensuring that the altars of the gods never ran dry. His reign saw the largest recorded sacrifice in Aztec history during the dedication of the Great Temple in 1487, where, according to some accounts, over 20,000 captives were slain in 4 days. These rulers did not act alone. The high priests, known as the Quetzalcoatl-Tlamocaski, played a crucial role in interpreting the will of the gods and organizing the rituals. They advised the emperor, determined the timing of sacrifices, and led the ceremonies with precision. Their influence was immense, as they were seen as the direct link between the mortal world and the divine. Together, the emperors and priests ensured that the sacrificial system remained a central pillar of Aztec society. Their actions were not driven by cruelty, but by a deep belief that without these offerings, the world would collapse. To them, the fate of the empire and the universe depended on the blood they spilled. The act of human sacrifice in the Aztec Empire was not a haphazard event. It was a highly structured, deeply symbolic ritual. Each step was carefully planned to ensure that the gods received the offering in the most powerful way possible. The process began with the selection of the victim. Most were captives taken in war, though some were slaves or volunteers who believed that death and sacrifice would grant them a place in the afterlife. Once chosen, the victim was treated with a mix of reverence and fear. They were often dressed as gods, given special food, and paraded through the city in the days leading up to their death. On the day of the sacrifice, the victim was taken to the top of the Great Temple or another sacred site, where a large stone altar awaited. Priests, wearing robes and masks representing different deities, prepared for the ceremony. The air would have been thick with incense and the rhythmic beat of drums. As the moment arrived, the victim was laid on their back across the altar. 4 priests held the limbs, while a 5th, the main sacrificer, wielded an obsidian blade. With a swift, practiced motion, he cut into the victim's chest, tore out the still-beating heart, and lifted it to the sky as an offering to the gods. The heart was placed in a bowl or on a special stone, often near an idol of the deity being honored. The body was then pushed down the temple steps where it was collected by attendants for further rituals. Some parts were burned, others were given to noble families, and in certain cases, the flesh was eaten in ceremonial feasts. These acts were not done out of cruelty, but as a way to absorb the divine power of the sacrifice. The Aztecs believed that this ritual was necessary to maintain cosmic balance. Without the blood of the sacrificed, the gods would grow weak and the world would fall into chaos. Each sacrifice was a renewal of the pact between humans and the divine, a way to ensure that the sun would rise again and the rains would come. The Aztec Empire did not rely solely on random captures to supply victims for sacrifice. Instead, they engaged in a unique form of warfare known as the Flower Wars. These were not battles fought for conquest or territory, but ritualized conflicts designed to capture prisoners for religious offerings. The most famous of these alliances was between the Aztecs and the neighboring city-states of Tlaxcala and Huexoidcinco. These wars were carefully arranged, with both sides agreeing to fight under specific conditions. The goal was not to kill enemies on the battlefield, but to take them alive for sacrifice. Flower wars served multiple purposes. First, they provided a steady supply of captives for the ever-hungry gods. Second, they allowed the Aztec warriors to hone their skills in controlled combat. Third, they reinforced the empire's dominance, as even the strongest city-states had to engage in these battles. The captured warriors were brought to Tenochtitlan, where they were honored in elaborate ceremonies before their deaths. They were dressed as gods, given special foods, and sometimes even allowed to fight in mock battles before being sacrificed. This system ensured that the Aztecs never ran out of victims. Unlike traditional wars where enemies might be killed or enslaved, the Flower Wars were specifically designed to capture individuals for ritual use. The Aztecs believed that the gods preferred warriors as offerings, as they were seen as the strongest and most honorable. By securing these captives through ritualized combat, the Aztecs maintained both their religious obligations and their military prowess.
However, the Flower Wars also had unintended consequences. They bred resentment among the conquered city-states, many of whom saw these battles as cruel and unnecessary. This growing hostility would later play a role in the fall of the Aztec Empire, as these same city-states would ally with the Spanish to overthrow their oppressors. The year was 1519. The Aztec Empire stood at its peak, its temples soaked in blood, its rulers convinced that their gods demanded more sacrifices than ever before. But on the eastern shores of the Gulf of Mexico, a new force arrived, one that would shake the foundations of the empire. Hernán Cortés and his Spanish conquistadors set foot on the land of the Aztecs, bringing with them steel weapons, horses, and a belief in a single, all-powerful god. At first, the Aztecs did not see the Spaniards as a threat. When Moctezuma II learned of their arrival, he hesitated. Some believed Cortés was the returning god Quetzalcoatl, a figure prophesied to return from the east. Others saw the strangers as dangerous invaders. The emperor sent gifts, gold, turquoise, and fine cloths, hoping to appease them. But the Spaniards did not come for gifts. They came for conquest. Cortés moved quickly. He formed alliances with the enemies of the Aztecs, particularly the Tlaxcalans, who had long suffered under Aztec rule. With their help, he marched toward Tenochtitlan. When he arrived, Moctezuma did not attack. Instead, he welcomed the Spaniards into the city, a decision that would seal his fate. Within days, Cortés took the emperor hostage, using him as a puppet to control the empire. Then came the massacre. While Cortés was away, his lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, ordered the slaughter of Aztec nobles during a sacred festival. The Aztecs, furious and betrayed, turned on the Spaniards. Cortés returned to find his men trapped in the palace, surrounded by an angry, armed population. The empire was no longer afraid. The gods had not protected them, and now the people were ready to fight back. This moment marked a turning point. The Spaniards, once seen as gods or guests, were now invaders. The Aztecs, led by Moctezuma's brother Cuitlahuac, rose in defiance. The battle for Tenochtitlan had begun. The battle for Tenochtitlan was brutal and relentless. After the initial uprising, the Aztecs drove the Spaniards from the city in an event known as La Noche Triste, the Sad Night. The Spaniards and their Tlaxcalan allies fled under heavy attack, losing much of their equipment and many men. But Cortés did not give up. He regrouped, rebuilt his forces, and returned with a new plan: to lay siege to the city. For months, the Spaniards and their native allies surrounded Tenochtitlan, cutting off food and supplies. They used small ships, built inland and carried to Lake Texcoco, to control the waterways. The Aztecs, weakened by starvation and disease, fought desperately. Smallpox brought by the Europeans ravaged the population. Cuitlahuac, the new emperor, died from the disease, and Cuauhtémoc took his place. Still, the Aztecs refused to surrender. The final assault came in August 1521. The Spaniards and their allies advanced through the city, street by street, house by house. The fighting was fierce, and the destruction was absolute. By the time the last resistance ended, Tenochtitlan lay in ruins. The Great Temple, once the heart of Aztec power and sacrifice, was torn down. The city's population had been decimated. The empire was no more. With the fall of Tenochtitlan, the practice of human sacrifice came to an end. The Spanish chroniclers, both horrified and fascinated, recorded every detail they could. Some, like Bernard Diaz del Castillo, described the rituals with a mix of awe and disgust, noting the sheer scale of the killings. Others, such as the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún, sought to understand the Aztec worldview, documenting their myths, beliefs, and daily life in painstaking detail. These accounts, written by both conquerors and scholars, became the foundation of modern knowledge about the Aztecs. Yet, even as the Spanish worked to erase Aztec religion, they could not fully erase its influence. The symbols of the old gods remained hidden in plain sight. Some indigenous artists, forced to convert to Christianity, wove Aztec imagery into Christian iconography. The Virgin of Guadalupe, for example, is often linked to the Aztec goddess Tonantzin, showing how old beliefs persisted beneath the surface. Even today, in rural parts of Mexico, echoes of the past remain in rituals, stories, and traditions passed down for centuries. Modern archaeology has also played a role in shaping our understanding of Aztec sacrifice. Excavations in Mexico City have uncovered mass graves filled with the remains of sacrificial victims. Scientists have studied the bones, finding signs of ritual cuts and careful preparation, confirming what the Spanish chroniclers described. At the Templo Mayor, the heart of Aztec religious life, archaeologists have uncovered offerings of human skulls, jade, and other sacred objects. These discoveries have given us a clearer picture of how deeply sacrifice was woven into the fabric of Aztec society. But the legacy of Aztec sacrifice is not just one of blood and death. It is also a story of belief, of a people who saw themselves as guardians of the universe. Their rituals were not acts of cruelty, but expressions of devotion. They believed that their sacrifices kept the world turning, that their blood sustained the gods. To them, death was not an end, it was a transformation, a way to return life to the divine.
Today, scholars continue to debate the true scale of Aztec sacrifice. Some argue that the Spanish exaggerated the numbers to justify their conquest. Others believe that the rituals were even more widespread than recorded. Regardless of the exact figures, one thing is clear. Human sacrifice was not a sideshow in Aztec life. It was central to their identity, their politics, and their faith. And though the empire fell, its story lives on. The practice of human sacrifice in the Aztec Empire has long been a source of controversy. Some view it as a brutal and inhumane ritual, a sign of a civilization that valued blood over life. Others argue that it was a deeply held religious belief,
a necessary act to maintain cosmic balance. The truth, as with many historical debates, lies somewhere in between. One of the biggest controversies is the question of scale. Spanish chroniclers described scenes of mass sacrifice, with thousands of victims slain in a single event. The figure of 20,000 captives sacrificed during the dedication of the Great Temple in 1487 has been widely cited, but modern scholars question whether these numbers are accurate. Some believe that the Spanish exaggerated the death toll to justify their conquest, painting the Aztecs as savages in need of civilization. Others point to archaeological evidence, such as the vast number of human remains found at the Templo Mayor, as proof that large-scale sacrifices did occur. Another debate centers on the motivations behind the practice. Was human sacrifice primarily a religious act, or was it also a tool of political control? Some historians argue that the Aztecs used sacrifice to instill fear in their enemies and maintain dominance over conquered peoples. The Flower Wars, for example, were not just religious rituals, but also a way to supply captives without engaging in full-scale war. The spectacle of sacrifice served as a warning: resist the empire, and you may find yourself on the altar. There is also the ethical question of how we judge past civilizations by modern standards. The Aztecs did not see their actions as cruel. To them, sacrifice was a sacred duty, a way to honor the gods and ensure the survival of the world. Should we condemn them for beliefs that were central to their culture, or should we try to understand them within their own historical context? These debates continue today, shaping how we view the Aztecs and their legacy. Human sacrifice was not unique to them. Many ancient civilizations, from the Maya to the Carthaginians, practiced it in some form. But the Aztecs took it to an unprecedented scale, making it a defining feature of their empire. Whether seen as a horrific ritual or a misunderstood religious practice, their sacrifices remain one of history's most enduring mysteries. Beyond the grand spectacles of mass sacrifice and the towering pyramids of Tenochtitlan, there were lesser-known aspects of Aztec ritual that reveal a more complex and nuanced picture of their sacrificial practices. These details, often overlooked in mainstream accounts, showed that human sacrifice was not just a public display of devotion, but also a deeply personal and symbolic act. One such detail is the role of voluntary sacrifice. While many victims were captives taken in war, some individuals willingly gave their lives to the gods. These volunteers, often slaves or lower-class citizens, believed that death in sacrifice would grant them a place in the afterlife. Some were even trained for months before their sacrifice, treated with honor and given special privileges. In some cases, they were allowed to marry or enjoy a final feast before their death. To them, this was not a punishment, but a sacred duty, a way to serve the gods and ensure cosmic balance. Another lesser-known fact is the diversity of sacrificial methods. While the removal of the heart was the most common form of sacrifice, especially for warriors, other methods were used depending on the deity being honored. For Tlaloc, the rain god, children were often sacrificed by drowning or having their hearts removed. Some victims were burned, others were shot with arrows, and in certain rituals they were forced to fight in mock battles before being slain. Each method was chosen to align with the specific needs of the gods, showing that sacrifice was not a one-size-fits-all practice. Perhaps the most surprising fact is that not all sacrifices involved humans. The Aztecs often substituted human victims with animals, effigies, or even food offerings, especially during times of war when captives were scarce. They also practiced self-sacrifice, where individuals would offer their own blood by piercing their tongues, ears, or genitals. These acts, though less dramatic, were seen as equally important in maintaining the gods' favor. These lesser-known aspects of Aztec sacrifice reveal a civilization that was not merely obsessed with death, but deeply committed to a belief system that saw sacrifice as a necessary and meaningful act. It was not just about blood, it was about devotion, identity, and the survival of the world itself. The Aztec Empire is gone, but its legacy endures. The ruins of Tenochtitlan lie beneath the streets of modern Mexico City, a reminder of a world that once thrived on the edge of a vast lake. The Great Temple, once the heart of Aztec worship, has been partially unearthed, its stones whispering the stories of those who climbed its steps in fear and reverence. The bones of the sacrifice still rest in the earth, silent witnesses to a belief system that shaped an empire. Yet the Aztecs were more than their rituals. They were poets, artists, engineers, and warriors. They built a city that rivaled the greatest capitals of Europe, with aqueducts, marketplaces, and libraries filled with codices that recorded their history, myths, and knowledge of the stars. Their calendar was precise, their understanding of astronomy remarkable. They were not savages, nor were they saints. They were people, driven by faith, bound by duty, and willing to give everything, even their lives, to uphold the order of the universe. Their sacrifices were not acts of cruelty, but expressions of devotion. To the Aztecs, the gods had given life, and in return, life had to be given back. The blood of the sacrificed was not wasted. It was a gift, a necessary offering to keep the sun in the sky, the rains falling, and the world turning. They did not see death as an end, but as a transformation, a way to return to the divine.
Today, the Aztecs are remembered in many ways. Their language, Nahuatl, still survives in parts of Mexico. Their symbols are found in murals, in art, and in the national identity of modern Mexico. Their story is told in books, in museums, and in the hearts of those who seek to understand the past. And though their empire fell, their beliefs, their rituals, and their sacrifices remain a part of human history, a testament to a people who believed that the fate of the world rested in their hands. The story of Aztec human sacrifice is not just a tale of blood and death. It is a story of belief, of a people who saw themselves as guardians of the universe. Their rituals, though shocking by modern standards, were not acts of cruelty, but expressions of devotion. To the Aztecs, sacrifice was not a choice, it was a duty, a way to ensure that the sun would rise, that the rains would fall, and that life would continue. But history does not end with the fall of an empire. The Aztecs left behind more than ruins and bones. They left behind ideas about duty, about the relationship between humans and the divine, about the price of survival. These ideas continue to shape how we understand the past and how we interpret the actions of ancient civilizations. We may never fully grasp the depth of Aztec belief, but we can try to see them not as monsters, nor as saints, but as people who lived by a set of rules that made sense in their world. As we look back on the Aztec Empire, we are reminded that history is not black and white. It is filled with complexities, contradictions, and questions that may never be fully answered. The debate over human sacrifice will continue as scholars, archaeologists, and storytellers seek to uncover the truth. And as we search for answers, we also search for understanding, not just of the Aztecs, but of ourselves. For in the end, the story of the Aztec Empire is not just about the past. It is about how we remember, how we judge, and how we choose to honor those who came before us.